Yes, Spurs fans, how are we? Welcome back to the Irish Hotspur and welcome back to a new season of Tottenham Hotspur. We are predicting the 2026 season, 2025, 2026 season predictions that we have in front of you. And we are going through the same exact categories that we have done before. Just want to stay consistent on them. And they're very fun to react to. I think one of the better members' videos that we had ever done actually was a fun reaction to our season predictions from last year. I remember Dave had some absolute worldies. I think I did as well. I predicted that we would be Europa League winners. And strangely, I predicted exactly dead on how many clean sheets that we would have in the Premier League. Looking forward to this. And without further ado, I think we get this started for anybody that is watching this back. Please smash the like button. Get into the comments, please, and let us know your season predictions and
Yeah.
let us know any of them that, of course, I imagine you could be disagreeing with or agreeing with. But let's get it started with, I don't think it's a controversial one, but we're going to start off with, will Frank actually survive his first season as Spurs manager? It's usually the case that they do, Dave. The only manager that of recent memory that didn't survive his first season was Nuno Espirito Santo. I think Thomas Frank is being given probably a bit more trust than what Nuno probably would.
Look, it would have to go drastically wrong for him to be sacked by October, to be honest with you, Jack. Um, Look, I think Nuno will survive the first season. I think he will, or I think Frank will survive the first season. I think plenty of fans will show him a lot of patience, to be fair. A lot of fans, he was a very popular appointment when we appointed him. And even when Postecoglou was under pressure, he was a very popular name thrown around by fans. So he's a very likable character. Look, I'm more like the Roy Keane, type of personality, and he's even won me around very, very quickly. So I think on that basis, I think he'll survive the season, Jack. No problem.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And exactly your phrasing, it would have to go terribly, terribly wrong for it to actually not survive in the first season. I think it's usually about the second season when it comes
Yeah.
to Spurs fans and just even the Spurs board. Now, where will Spurs finish? This is when we start asking the more difficult questions. Dave, you went with seventh. I went with sixth. I think you and I are in a similar boat. I'll maybe take some points here in that Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, I'm throwing in as an automatic combination of top four. I'm not sure exactly what the order will be of those teams, but I think they're all well and clear of us in terms of their spending, also their time maybe with their own respective managers. Of course, Pep Guardiola, freshly motivated off of maybe a lackluster season by their own standards. Arne Slot, has built an incredible team and is also, coming off the back of winning the Premier League. I think Chelsea have strengthened incredibly, but also Enzo Maresca, maybe at one point looked like he could have been under some pressure. I think now is actually maybe starting to settle in by the looks of things at Chelsea. And then we all know Arteta and Arsenal, they always seem to hover in and around that top four and even close to the top position. So I think top four, no way we're cracking into that. It's kind of between us and who would you say, like Newcastle, Aston Villa, maybe another team for the battle for the rest of those spots?
Yeah, look, Jack, I think, for me, my one is based off being very lucky with injuries this season. If we get injuries, I do think we could be a mid-table team. I think it could have a detrimental impact on our campaign, like it did underneath Postecoglou last season, which led to his sacking, and also underneath Antonio Conte in his second season, that led to his sacking, because we don't have a deep squad at Tottenham. So if we get injuries and incur injuries, it's going to be a long season. But the reason why I think he'll finish mid-table or higher is because regardless of the injuries, he will set us up to be defensively solid. And with how good he does set teams up in terms of attacking set pieces, we always have a chance of going and nicking results. So that puts us in good stead in terms of the Premier League. But with Champions League being factored in, I just don't think we're good enough to be able to maintain a Champions League campaign alongside a Premier League campaign and break the top four with the squad that we've got, to be honest with you. I think I look at Man City strengthened massively, although I don't think they're going to be anywhere near winning the league title. I do think they'll make top four. Liverpool have strengthened massively. I think that loss against Palace was a blip. I think that'll highly motivate them heading into this season. Chelsea have also acted early in getting their transfer business in. I think they'll be a decent outfit. I think Man United, to a degree, might surprise a lot of people. And then you're probably looking at maybe Newcastle, Aston Villa, and maybe one surprise package, which there always is. It was West Ham, it was Brighton then recently and stuff like that. And I think that's the lot that maybe we'd be competing with as long as injuries go in our favour. I'm just going off the hope we can't have an entire 11 injured like we did last season.
I think you made a good point to me. I think on stream as well as behind closed doors. So I am kind of stealing your point, but you made the point that maybe last season, a lot of these periphery teams like Bournemouth, Fulham, Crystal Palace, Brighton, a lot of these sort of sides, right? They had really good players that now have been poached away. Brentford, even too, right?
Yeah.
To an extent, have had a lot of decent players that have now been taken away by the bigger sides. And this is now, and they found it hard by the looks of things, looking from the outside in, to
Mm.
re-strengthen, and it will take them a while to strengthen again with new
Yeah.
top so it's almost like the battle for the 5th, 6th, 7th positions might
Yeah.
not be nearly as hard this year as it was last year. Last year, it felt like actually the Premier League was really a good example of like there's no easy game in the Prem because it
Mm.
felt like every team actually had a really good manager and or also some pretty good players here and there in that side that would make it into a lot of top 4 teams. So I wonder if that's going to be a little bit
Well,
different
for
this year.
instance, you look at Bournemouth, the challenge they posed last year. A lot of their players have been picked off. A lot of their top
Yeah.
players have already left. Brighton will probably end up selling one or two before the window closes as well. Wolves have lost Cunha. He was their main asset last year. A lot of these teams have been picked off by bigger clubs, so it might actually work out in our favor.
Yeah, so it's one point that David think made on stream before that
Yeah.
I think he's made to me as well, and I kind of agree. I think that's what's going to make it even easier for us to try to challenge in and around 5th, 6th, and 7th. And we all know that I believe 5th could be able to guarantee us maybe a Champions League spot as well. So that would be very impressive. But I think the teams that we'll be competing with, in my personal opinion, will be Manchester United, Newcastle, and probably an Aston Villa, maybe Forest. We'll see if Forest can challenge up there again. They've mostly strengthened instead of losing a lot of their best players. So we'll see how they handle it.
Mm.
The only big player that I think they've lost, right, is Anthony Elanga for a big fee, but they have replaced him with some guys. So we'll see how they end up
Mm.
handling the Premier League. I think if they had lost Gibbs White, I don't think I would be including them in that
Mm.
competition. But maybe they might be someone to look out for as
They'll be,
well.
they, they'll be an interesting one because, like you said, they're a club that hasn't been picked off and they have gone and strengthened. So, I think they'll be interesting. Look, I have a soft spot for Forest, but why that fat idiot's in charge? To be honest with you, I hope they get relegated. To be quite frank with you. But look, let's welcome a couple of people in, then we will kick on. Big
Go
up,
ahead.
Ryan. Good to see you, my man. Great to see Shantam, as always. Great to see you, buddy. Alberto's in the house. Big up, Alberto. Good to see you. We've also got Luke in the house. Good to see you, my man. We also have
Randomized.
Muval randomized. Good to see you. We also have Visca Ori in the house. Great to see you. Paddy Hardick, good to see you as always, brother. How are you keeping, my man? And then he says, afternoon, wonderful people. If we get the signings, I hope we do, then we will finish in the top 4. Look, if we bring in Eze and Savino, me and Jack might have to do a revised version of this, but let's wait and see. And then big up, Erwin. Great to see you as always. Hi, Dave, Jack, and chat. Jesus, it's hard to call where we will finish, but hopefully top 5. I really do hope so. I don't think anyone wants a campaign like we suffered last year. And we also have Bing Guy in the house. Or Billy Guy says, Dave, man, I like the way you speak English. Sounds very cool. I appreciate that. It's the first time I've been called cool since maybe 14 years of age. So I really appreciate that, Billy Guy. I didn't think an old guy like me could be cool anymore. And then we've got Davey Hall. Come on, you Spurs. Big up, everyone. To be fair, though, I appreciate that because a lot of people say I can't even speak English. So thank you very much. Some people say I speak German better than I do English.
And it's also a bit rich coming from Ryan for him to tell us to have faith in
Oh,
Thomas
yeah.
Franco, but I think we are showing a bit of faith of him that we're saying that he's going to get top 10 in his first season here, Ryan. I don't think we're being too negative about it. FA Cup dreams now, Dave. Spurs will be entering the FA Cup in the 3rd round. That's what you researched before we put out
Yeah.
these images. So it looks like you think we'll make it past the 3rd round, but get knocked out in the 4th. Why is that?
You just look at our campaign's recent history. We fare better in the League Cup than what we do in the FA Cup. Pre Dave Harris being born, we fared better in the FA Cup than what we did the League Cup, but that's changed. Maybe on the bad omen in terms of the FA Cup, but also when it comes to the FA Cup, by the time it comes around January, you're off the back of a grueling fixture list. You usually have a lot of injuries in and around then as well. And to be fair, the draw is not really ever kind to us in the FA Cup either. Usually we end up getting a big team or a Premier League team, within the first round or the third or the fourth round of the draw. So for me, I'm just going off recent history. And Thomas Frank doesn't have a great record in terms of cups, in his time at Brentford. So for me, I am going to go with us going out at a 4 round of the FA Cup. I hope I'm wrong, because I would love to lift another trophy. And my dad's probably going to kill me, because he actually said to me, this is the trophy he thinks we're going to win this year.
I think we'll go a little bit deeper in the FA Cup, because I think Frank will try to take it a bit seriously. I wonder, of course, he's going to try to do his best in the Champions League, but I'm not sure what our expectations really are in the Champions League this season, especially if we're not going to strengthen as much as we would have liked. So I wonder if he sees the domestic competitions as a better chance to give us that hope, give us that potential glory. But I do wonder if we'll eventually come up against a team that's just too good for us. And he's also going to probably find a point where maybe he gets dealt a Man City, a Chelsea, an Arsenal, someone like that, a Liverpool, when he's in the middle of battling multiple competitions, injuries. An FA Cup game sometimes comes in the middle of that congested winter fixture period. And that always gets the best of even any manager, even if you're the top level managers in the game. Sometimes you get dealt, a tough FA Cup draw. And I wonder if that could end up happening. So I kind of using your logic, but maybe just a little bit later down. So I hope that we get some easier opponents to begin with, but then later on, middle of, let's say, December, January, February, he gets dealt a really tough team while also trying to balance all these other competitions. And that's just too much for us. And he has to rotate the squad. And then we just don't really have a chance of getting through. So that's kind of my logic for it. A little bit boring, if you ask me. But let us know. Does anybody have any real confidence in us going deep into an FA Cup or a League Cup? Let me know, everybody. League Cup dreams. Now we're talking about the Carabao Cup here. I'll go first by just saying Happy Clapperjack is always going to find some competition that I'm getting good vibes about. I did sort of lay my logic out earlier that I wonder if Thomas Frank is going to be prioritizing or looking at one of these domestic competitions as his chance to give us that glory, give us that taste of sweet, sweet trophy once again. And I'm going to go for the League Cup this time, because it's not that many games. They also don't come that often, right? You play one early on, then you wait a little while to play another one.
No
Then you wait a
extra
little
time.
while to play another one. You have a lot of time in between, to sort of plan out. So I wonder if he could cleverly organize the squad during each schedule, during each week, and then make sure that he has a strong enough squad for each of these League Cup games. And then he sees that as an opportunity to push for a trophy. Whereas the FA Cup, it's a lot more games, a lot more fixtures. Sometimes you're coming up against these teams that you don't know too much about. Whereas in the League Cup, you're usually coming up against sides that you already play in the Premier League to an extent. So I'm going to say that the League Cup might be an easier competition for him to win. Not saying it is easy, but maybe slightly easier in the FA Cup for some of the reasons I mentioned into the Champions League. But I'm not expecting him to go deep into the Champions League. Let's just say that. So this is, I think, his opportunity to try to achieve something similar to Ange Postecoglou.
Yeah, look, for me, I just, when I look at it, I think, the Carabao Cup is a competition. We've reached the semi-final in a number of times. We were there against Chelsea underneath Antonio Conte. We've reached it a couple of times under Pochettino, under Postecoglou. We were there against Liverpool. And ultimately what ends up happening is we get to the semi-final and then we get bet by one of the big four teams usually and get absolutely hammered and knocked out of the competition. And then we were recently in the final as well under Jose Mourinho. Jose Mourinho was sacked, but we actually beat Brentford, if you remember, to get to the final against Man City and then lost it. So the Carabao Cup is one that we actually have more of a recent history in of going further, and that's why I've gone semi-final. And then I just think usual business will resume where we get dumped out.
Yeah. MJ Wolf thinks we'll go past the fourth round. Rain Man saying, I think we run out of puff when the FA Cup gets busy. That's my logic, man. Exactly. And Frank will prioritize the Premier League at that point. And he's saying much better chance of a League Cup run, in my opinion. We're in the exact same boat there, Mr. Rain Man. And Champions League dreams. Now, Dave's going last 16. Do you think we'll get the automatic qualification, Dave, to the round of 16? Or will we fall into that playoff situation where you go to a version of the round of 32, play that playoff game, and then you go to the last 16? How do you think it's going to go for us? Straight to the last 16, or are we going to end up falling outside of that initial automatic qualification?
Look, I think we will go through the playoffs. I don't see us getting outside, through in the top 8. I think that's a huge ask. I think we will end up having to go through the playoffs. I just think with the way Thomas Frank sets us up, the set pieces, like you looked at us against PSG there the other day, We absolutely bullied them. You know, they weren't a match in terms of height and stuff like that. I think it might actually serve us well to a certain degree on the European stage. And I think somehow we might just shithouse our way to a last 16. But I think any further than that, we're really, really pushing our luck.
Also, depending on the opponent that you
We are
get.
Europa League champions, by the way. There's going to be some swag in some of these players heading into the European games. Let's not forget
For
that.
sure. I think we'll go to the quarterfinals. I'm kind of with you. Like I'm not ruling us out of falling outside that top 8, top 9, and then we end up having to go through the playoffs. But sometimes you can come up against these teams that on paper might seem like really intimidating opponents, but in actuality, you might actually have a better squad or, or just playing against better teams on a regular basis. Like, for example, right, Borussia Dortmund aren't the same team that they used to be. They've kind of sort of fallen off their pedestal. You could come up against a team like a Lille or someone like that, where maybe it's a big name, but maybe when you look at the actual names on paper, they're not actually up the top level. I think Bodo Glimt, will still be in the Champions League, teams like that. So there are plenty of sides that maybe, again, on paper look great, but I think we'll find a way to be able to get past them to some extent. I think even AZ Alkmaar, if I'm not mistaken, might even be in the Champions League this year. Not saying they'll qualify or anything, but it's if we get lucky enough, I think we'll play some teams that potentially will have an easier time against. And then in the quarterfinals, once you're in the quarterfinals, it's usually no easy team.
I also just think, last season at times, remember the Roma game, the Roma manager made changes, changed the game on Postecoglou and ended up getting a result out of it. And I just think, against Thomas Frank, I know what happened against PSG the other day, but teams aren't going to have the bench that PSG has had. And I just think, Thomas Frank will be more suited to some teams in Europe because he is tactically smart, tactically astute. So I think we could surprise a few people this year, pick up a few results that maybe we're not expecting.
Good to see you, Jimmy Hotspur. Good to see you, DJ AK. I just think, if we come up against, I don't know, there's also been a lot of managerial turnaround, like Bayer Leverkusen under Eric Ten Hag. I wonder if they'll not be as good as they might have been, a couple of years ago under Xabi Alonso. You have as well Inter Milan all of a sudden going through a different manager too. It's not Simone Inzaghi anymore. AC Milan are also going through some managerial changes and just a lot of changes over there. So sometimes I just think the big names on paper in the Champions League aren't as good as maybe what they used to be. Even Juventus, right? Juventus have had a lot of managerial turnaround. So I have a weird confidence that if we come up against maybe some of those teams that will look very intimidating, but might not actually be as good as what they might have been a few years ago. So that's just my feeling. But I just feel like quarterfinals, you have every chance of coming up against a Real Madrid, a Bayern Munich, a PSG, Man City, even Arsenal, these type of sides, and then, you really have to be of a top level quality to get past them. That's just how I see it going down. Now, clean sheets, you've gone for 8.
Yeah.
Last year, you went for 10. Now, what makes you go for less this year than what you did last year?
Not quite so sure, to be honest with you, Jack. I think last year maybe 10 was a bit far-fetched.
Just felt like a good number.
I look at Vicario's form pre-season. It's worrying me a little. I think eventually he might find his feet, but I think, he's looking a bit shaky, suspect from shots outside the area. I've noticed in pre-season. And if it is a case where maybe we get involved and we have to end up bringing Kinski in and change keeper midway through the season or earlier on in the season, again, I think it might take a bit of time to bed in. But look, to be fair, I think Thomas Frank averaged I think he 7 or 8 clean sheets at Brentford last year. I think maybe we'll be in and around the same. Could be between 8 and 10, maybe. I'll be surprised if it's much higher than that. And the reason why I've also gone with 8 as well, though, Jack, is as well, I'm going to bring mentality into this. And exactly what I mean is exactly what happened the other night. And this was rinse and repeat last year under Ange Postecoglou as well. When we had something to hold on to, we couldn't hold on to it in a game. And we've got an even worse forward line, and it's getting even worse. And if you don't score goals at this level, the ball's going to, and you can't hold it up, which if we suffer injuries, the ball's going to keep coming back one way, and eventually that dam is going to crack. Eventually they will penetrate you. So for me, on that basis and the mentality basis, because I don't think we have enough goals to go and kill teams off, there's going to be a lot of scrappy ends to games this season. And I just wonder, will our mentality as a team be called into question again, and that's why I'm going 8. And I can't give you a better answer than that. I've knocked that one
That's
out of the
fine.
park.
Fine. No, I think 10 probably just sounded good under Ange, and then maybe we got brought back down to earth, because
Well,
it
I
ended
thought
up
we were
being.
going to kick on last year under Ange, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, and so now we're a little bit worried about our ability to keep out goals. I personally think the strength in this team and the most amount of quality and abundance is in our defense. I do think we have a good goalkeeper in Vicario. As much as I've criticized Kinski in the past, I do think he's a fine backup. And then when you look at that back line, Danzo, Van de Ven, Romero, I think are all great defenders. And then in terms of the fullback positions, Pedro Porro, Jed Spence, Destiny Udogi, all great defenders on their day, all great fullbacks. I think that's where his strength is in the squad, is in Thomas Frank. And Thomas Frank seems to be looking at solidifying the defense more than anything. So I see this season being a little bit dull at times, where I could see it being a lot of 1-0s, a lot of 2-0s, maybe even some 0-0s here and there. And that's how I see this season unfolding, which could mean a lot of clean sheets, actually. I don't see us blowing away a ton of teams this year. I just see a lot of these games staying very close and very low scoring. And
Yeah, I think that's where we differ. I think you're backing on them to hold out in a lot more of them games, whereas
yeah.
I'm expecting them to crumble a little bit. And I think that's
Mhm.
where the difference in the numbers are here.
Yeah, I'm backing Van de Ven, I'm backing Romero, I'm backing
I think
these
we
guys
both agree,
yeah.
the defense is going to be heavily relied on because our forward line couldn't trap a bag of cement,
Right.
But I think where the difference comes in is I just think the mentality. I'm not sure we have the mentality to hold on to tight games.
Totally. So I'm going for 12, double
Mhm.
the amount that we had last year. And hopefully Thomas Frank can prove me right, because I would love to have around 12 clean sheets. As people know, I've been saying this. I am more of a defensive minded guy, anyways. And I have some strange faith in Thomas Frank to be able to deliver that for us this year. But it will be dull and it will be boring at times, everybody. So don't blame us and don't get mad at us if that ends up happening. And also, this is what plenty of people asked for, was a
Yep.
bit more of that solidity and that defensive minded approach. And with that could mean more clean sheets. But now let's move on to our biggest win of the season. You've gone for Burnley. Now, Dave, is it going to be tomorrow, the biggest win of the season, or will it be the next time we play Burnley?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping it's tomorrow, Jack. I think it was under Postecoglou. We slapped them up 5-1, didn't we, opening game of the season? Romero scored an absolute screamer. I think even Solomon, had a good game that day. He's only good game for Tottenham Hotspur, actually. Probably the only time we've seen him play. But for me, if Burnley, if we don't take our chances early on tomorrow against Burnley, which I think we could create a couple, I think it becomes a very long game. If we take them early on, there's every potential we could slap them. But regardless, whether it's home or away, I think we will score goals against Burnley at some point in this season, and that will be our biggest win.
The reason I've gone for Brighton is because we nearly smacked them up under Ange Postecoglou last year, right? And then we sacrificed a huge lead, which was just so horrible to watch. And I wonder if that's on the back of people's minds. But then also Brighton at the end of last season smacked us up in our own stadium. And I've used this logic before. I think players sometimes think about teams that maybe they felt like they could have done better against, teams that they maybe feel like they have a little bit of revenge on their minds against. Newcastle was one of those sides that Dave and I mentioned before, that we were thinking, okay, maybe this is the game that we actually score a lot of goals against, because they'll be freshly motivated to try to beat that Newcastle team. I wonder if that history between us and Newcastle is starting to maybe fade away now. But I think with Brighton, I wonder if there's something there, because like I said, they smacked us up in one of our last games under Ange Postecoglou. But then also we sacrificed. That was one of the worst losses of that season, when we were up at halftime and somehow ended up losing that game. And I wonder if they'll look at that as maybe an opportunity to try to right the wrongs from before. And so for some reason, I'm thinking it's going to be Brighton. And they do play that very dangerous high line that I wonder if Thomas Frank could end up maybe thinking of something to try to sort of expose that. Because Fabian Ertzler, great manager, but he's, a bit in the Ange category, the Luis Enrique category of the guys that do take a lot of risks, going forward. And I wonder if Brighton have, in a way, almost gotten worse in terms of their actual quality, because I feel like they're going to have a few of their players picked apart and taken away. They lost to Stupinian, who's a great fullback. I'm not sure if they're going to really be able to properly replace him. Carlos Baliba could also be leaving them to go to Manchester United. I think they lost Evan Ferguson, who I know wasn't playing a ton, but I'm not sure who they've really strengthened with up top. Joao Pedro has also left. Is it still just like, what is it, Danny Welbeck and maybe someone else that I'm trying to, Matoma, of course. I'm not really, let's just say, I just don't know if Brighton have necessarily improved a lot on their squad. And then Fabian Ertzler, like a lot of managers, you do get found out, in your second season sometimes. So I just wonder if maybe Brighton might not be as good as they might want to be. And Thomas Frank being a very experienced Premier League head, maybe he has a trick or two up his sleeve against this Brighton team. And I said also the player motivation behind it to maybe smack them up. So that's why I'm going with. Top goal scorers now, Davo. Everybody give us your top goal scorers. Spotlight on Spurs. Good to see you. K32. Good to see you as well. All players played well last Wednesday. Frank will get the best out of them. I worry about Vicario, though. Dave said I have to save my best stuff for tomorrow morning on the pre-match build-up because he says he's got some good questions on Vicario. So I'm going to have to do my best defense of him. But we're going to be talking about some top goal scorers here, Dave. We've gone for Solanke. Last season, we had Solanke in our top 3, but we didn't have him as the top goal scorer. In a way, I know you said this is harsh to say because it is dependent on the service. I think this is a version of a make or break season here for Solanke. I think last year he had I called it an okay season. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't amazing. Delivered in some clutch games against Frankfurt and especially in the Europa League. I think he was our top goal scorer. So he delivered in some big games for us. But in some other games, he was missing his chance, his creativity, the chances that were given to him. Some games he was given nothing to work with. Other games he was given stuff to work with and then just wasn't able to put them away, you could say. So this year, if he gets the service, you and I look like are backing him to be able to put away the goals. But how do you feel about Solanke?
Well, look, Johnson was our top goal scorer last season, the club's top goal scorer. But to be honest with you, Thomas Frank mentioned today about the youngsters being out on loan. He mentioned physicality and intensity to play at this level. Now, they're not something you aim at Brennan Johnson, which means for me, I think he's going to find himself out of the team and further down the pecking order as the season goes on. So I think that eliminates him from even being in contention to be up there for top goal scorer this season. So we'll come back to this at the end of the season, and it's just going to be green tick on that one. I've nailed that. So that takes him out of contention. We've also sold Son, so that takes him out of contention. So I just think naturally the next option
step up.
falls on Dominic Solanke. And I do think eventually, although Richarlison played well the other night, and I think Richarlison will start tomorrow, I think Solanke will find himself ahead of Richarlison. I did actually have Richarlison in this list. However, I took him out because I can't guarantee he's going to stay fit this season and score enough goals to be in this list. But I just think by default and natural selection, I think it just falls as Solanke being the top goal scorer this season.
Thomas Frank said
that doesn't mean he's going to score 25 goals. It might mean he might score 12, but at least he still end up top goal scorer.
Yeah. Thomas Frank, though, had a really high praise for Solanke, right? So you wonder if he is going to try to get the best out of him once he's back into shape.
Yeah.
You and I have both gone for Kudus as our second most goals scored. I think Kudus will improve dramatically on what his numbers were with West Ham. And what I've seen so far, this guy is practically a one-man attack. I know he's creating more than he's scoring, but he still is finding himself with some shooting opportunities here and there. So I will expect that Kudus, especially if he gets a bit more support around him, if he were to get an Eze into his team, or if he were to eventually get Kulusevski and maybe some others back into the side to help him out a bit more, and potentially, let's say, Savinho or others that can draw attention away from him. I think Kudus, when he's given maybe some opportunities to score, I expect him to actually score some goals this year, and maybe even some worldies.
No, I think he will. I think he's our best attacking player. I think he's going to have to rely on a few solo efforts, but I do see him grabbing between 8 to 10 goals this season. I think that comfortably put him as our second top goal scorer.
He's the only guy I can think of that would put on like a solo effort type of goal that will just sort of at one point, top of the box, just cuts inside, just curls one into the top netting. There are very few players in this team right now that I think are actually capable of that, which is a damning indictment of this forward line because usually almost every Premier League team has a guy like that can do that. But Spurs, I think, have struggled, especially last year. We really struggled to have anyone do something like that. But I think Kudus is the one that can. Now, your third man, I think people can tell by the nickname, the Rom Bomber. I imagine that's via set pieces, Dave, that Mr. Romero will be contributing.
Look, it's worth mentioning if we sign Eze, I'm going to put Eze in this list, but we haven't signed him at the day of our time of recording, so I had to pick between Papa Matasar and Rombom. Look, I think your pick is probably going to end up being the right one in terms of Papa Matasar. But I just have a sneaky feeling from Romulus, Jack, to be quite frank. And the reason why, long throws into the box, set pieces, free kicks into the box. I think he's going to get a lot of chances. Last season under Ange, when we did put corners and that into the box, it was usually Rombom that was on the end of the majority of them. So for me, I think easily there could be between, I'm mad to say, but 5 to 8 goals for a centre-back this year with how, good we look from set pieces. So for me, I think, I'm going with a cheeky punt here and putting in Rombomulus. Plus, he's club captain, and I see, I think if the game's in the balance and we get a set piece, I see him being the most determined to get on the end of it and try and be that match winner and make the difference. So I'm going to go with Rombom.
I'm going for Pat Matasar because I think this guy has just a knack to be at the right place at the right time to score goals. And he is such a box-to-box presence that he'll find himself with shooting opportunities. And Dave and I have said this about the kid, even when he was playing poor at some points, he's got probably one of the best and most powerful shots in the team right now at Spurs. This guy can hit it from distance, and he can hit them really, really well, where he doesn't usually just blaze it over the bar. He actually makes the goalkeeper have to save them. So I think if he gets any opportunities outside the box, I rate Sarr to be able to put in a decent effort. And he just seems to sort of find himself in the right areas in the box. It's not just outside the box. He finds these areas when he's running into the box to be there at the right place at the right time. So I'm rating Pat Matasar, especially maybe in these first few games before Eze maybe comes through the door, even if Eze comes through the door. I think he'll be given that license to get forward, and he'll be that guy that will take risks here and there to try to maybe get into a goal scoring opportunity. So, and also, like we're saying before, maybe Eze does, potentially sign for Spurs. We had to come up with a third one. So I'm going for Pat Matasar. I would also add, in his first season under Ange Postecoglou, Pat Matasar was given, I think, the most consistent player in the team, or at least a lot of people thought of him as like kind of one of the most consistent midfielders. Part of that had to do with he was contributing with goals and assists, every now and again. He was a guy that just sort of found himself in the good areas to potentially score or create something. And then even in his last season under Ange, which a lot of people admittedly, including me, would say wasn't really his best season in a Spurs shirt, but his last season under Ange, he still got, I think it was like 8 more goal contributions than Lucas Bergvall, who was everybody's favorite player from last season under Ange. But Pat Matasar, in an off season, while playing also, I think, fewer minutes than even Lucas Bergvall, or like a similar amount of minutes to Lucas Bergvall, still contributed about 8 more goals, in total than Lucas Bergvall in terms of goals and assists. So just saying that, Pat Matasar finds a way, to get a goal contribution. So I'm going for him as my third choice. But like we said, Eze probably would make this list if he gets through. I do. Yeah.
Porro, Tyler mentions, look, I was tying with the idea of Pedro Porro potentially because he's taking free kicks and stuff. I think with Porro, I'll be honest, I think last season he found himself in good positions where you expect him to score because how technically good is his striking the ball, and didn't. But when he unleashes from long range, he tends to score. So for me, he's more of an assister, but relies on a worldie. And that's why maybe I didn't put him in this list, Tyler. I think he's going to be more used as, a guy to swing in the ball and stuff like that, more assists this year than goals. But that is a fair shout. And then Erwin says, how can you leave Johnson off this list?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this.
He was the top scorer last year. What do you have to do to stay in the team? Look, I've always said, and I maintained this last year, don't get hyped up off just him coming in at the back post and finishing off everyone else's work. And I've said this to all the Johnson fanboys. I'm not saying you are, Aaron, but, I've said with another manager that comes in the door, they are going to want more out of him. They are going to expect them to deliver more. And you listen to Thomas Frank today about why so many youngsters were loaned out, intensity and physicality. Well, you don't associate intensity in Johnson's game when he gets the ball or out of possession. And neither do you associate physicality with the game, which means to me, I think unless he improves on that drastically over the course of this season, he's going to find himself on the periphery of the team a lot this season. And I don't think he's going to get the opportunities to score as many goals as he did last year. But I think what people need to understand is they knew Johnson's how much of a liability he was in terms of the build-up play last season under Ange. So they fit the whole system to go down the left-hand side, put it across for Johnson to tap home on the right-hand side, and actually made him look good. And I think that's where many fans have got hyped up. Rather than actually take the emotion out of it and look at the situation for what it is, we didn't go down and attack the right-hand side because we couldn't, because he's useless, which meant, we had to try and get the best out of him. So everything was geared up to just get him at the back post and tap them home. It's not going to be like that under Thomas Frank. I'm sorry, it's not going to be set up around your weakest attacker. If he's not good enough, he's not going to play. Just like we've seen against PSG the other night. Okay, none of you want to take your left, put your hand up for the left wing spot. No problem. I'll just go with 2 strikers next week. See how you like being on the bench. And I just think Johnson's things will be limited a lot this season, which I think will take him out of the pecking order. Harsh, but I did warn the Johnson fanboys this time was coming.
I worry for him because the spot has already just been taken by Mohamed Kudus. So where everybody says that he plays the best is as a right winger, or at least on the right side. And a lot of people have already been coming out and saying, why is Frank playing him on the left? That's not where he plays his best. It's like, well, because Mohamed Kudus has clearly taken that spot. So that's one reason why Johnson might not score as many times. But then another is like what Dave is mentioning is working hard off of the ball. Johnson still, like, I know, like, maybe towards the end of the season when games were really on the line, he started to improve in that area, but I don't know if he's a guy that really is that willing to really press his ass off and work hard for the team in terms of out of possession. I do think that's still an area that he just, for some reason, doesn't have it in him, whether it's fitness, desire. I'm not sure. I kind of even question both when it comes to his off the ball work rate, hunger. That's probably another good word for it. And that's another reason why you might not get as many minutes under Thomas Frank. This is something that, as boring as it is to say, I think it goes a really long way with him. If you are willing to work hard, be an unselfish player, get stuck in, dig deep, help out your fellow teammates in terms of creating that defensive shape, being hard to break down, winning the ball back in good areas, holding up the ball so that you can win free kicks. Johnson is just not that guy. And I think Thomas Frank would rather have someone that can do that than someone that he feels like can pop up at the back post. And here's another thing just to mention too. With Ange Postecoglou, the majority of games when we had a lot of possession, we would camp teams in their own half. So that allowed Johnson to make those runs towards the back post because we're just sort of trying to break a team down. We're whipping in crosses. We're looking to try to find these areas inside the box to exploit. With the way that Thomas Frank plays, there will be a lot of games where we're looking to hit teams on the counterattack and we're looking to have to cover like 50, 60 yards in order to get to the opposition box. Johnson, again, is just not one of those players that's going to sit deep, work really hard for 20, 30 minutes, and then be able to drag us up the pitch all the way to the other side to score a goal. Look at Yohan Wissa, look at Mbumo. Those were guys that created their own goals and then scored their own goals almost by themselves, by beating players, creating little nice movements between each other. Johnson is not a guy that is creating 1-2s, is beating guy after guy, in terms of the one-on-ones. Like Thomas Frank had excellent attackers that could sort of just be one-man attacks on their own. He's even relying on Mohamed Kudus to be like a one-man attack on his own at the minute. And Johnson is just not one of those players for me. And so I think that's why he'll struggle. I just feel like Thomas Frank, the way that he plays and the way that he likes to attack, it doesn't suit Johnson. And I don't know how, to Rainman's point, he's saying, I think Frank will find a way to get the best out of Johnson's box finishing. Maybe he will, but I don't know if
not.
I don't think it's going to be something that he's going to use consistently. I think he's going to be more reliant on someone like Kudus. He's going to be more reliant on someone like Solanke. He's going to be more reliant on someone like Pop Matasar. These guys that work hard for the team, that are willing to dig deep. But then when they do have possession, he can find ways to get them goals. Because I just think working hard for the team, as well as beating players in possession, 1v1s, that type of thing, goes a long way with Thomas Frank. And Johnson doesn't excel in either of those. Those are his worst attributes. Just lastly, Dave, it's funny when people say you give Johnson such a hard time, all he needs to improve on is passing, dribbling, decision making. And you're like, so the basic facets of football he needs to improve on other than maybe finishing. And Johnson, lastly, he doesn't even create his own goals. He just doesn't. When have you seen Johnson beat 2 players and then curl one into the top of the net? He doesn't do that. And I do feel like sometimes this team will have to be reliant on players to be able to do that in this system. A bit of magic. Johnson doesn't produce magic. He produces goals at the back post.
Well, if creativity is your biggest problem, you need to be able to create opportunities to be able to score goals, then Johnson ain't good enough. He's nowhere near good enough. And look, Thomas Frank operates off the policy, hard work beats talent every day of the week, and it's a bonus if you've got both. Johnson doesn't work hard. So on that basis, he's going to find his options limited. And when he does get in the side, a question, is he going to have anywhere near enough when the team is not suited up to suit Johnson's weaknesses? And is he going to take his chances? I'm not so sure. I think Rayman, to your point, I think Postecoglou set up to get the best out of Johnson. because he just said when we attack, go down the left-hand side and put it across for Johnson to tap in. Never went down the right-hand side with it. And anytime we did, Johnson passed it back and went back down the left across the ball. So on that basis, he's just not going to find himself anywhere near in the team. And if we're setting up our whole team, for the weakest member of the attack line, rather than just dropping them, then you're going to finish 17th like you did last season.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, of course, we love to be proved wrong by Johnson.
Look, I know people paint Frank as the Messiah, but I think there also has to be a recognition at Tottenham Hotspur as fans, because we really do cherish the absolute dross of our squad. We really do. People are so butthurt when I mention Ben Davies, but we're okay just to go sell Harry Kane, no problem. People were butthurt when I used to mention Dyer, but sit there and go, well, if Romero ain't committed, fuck him off, bin him off. Shit like that. We really do cherish the shit of our squad, and we always sit there and hope for the best of them. And I get it, because as Tottenham fans, we're trained to be the underdogs. But the reality is there's just some players that you can't develop, and that's just the nature of the game. It's the nature of the sport. And I'm afraid Johnson is one of them. The kid's 24 years of age. He can't beat a man, he can't cross a ball, and he's afraid of his own fucking shadow. And I'm sorry, I think, for me, I don't think he's going to turn into this player that, what was it they used to say? He's going to be the new Gareth Bale. I don't think he's ever going to turn into that. I've never once seen any glimpses to show me that he even has that anywhere in his fucking body, let alone one of his feet, So for me, I don't buy it. He's one that we need to bin off very, very quickly. And I think this season he's going to go from hero to zero very, very quickly.
Goal of the season, I've gone for Mohamed Kudus, mostly because of what I just described earlier, that I feel like he's the only guy that can replicate what we saw from Mbeumo and Yohan Wissa. He's a guy that I feel like can almost create a goal all on his own. I could see him having a similar goal that he did with West Ham in the Europa League, where I think it was against Freiburg, the German team, where he just, took the ball in his own half, skill past 5-6 players, then finished a one-on-one. I could see him doing that with this Thomas Frank team, where he picks up the ball from deep, ends up skinning 3-4 players, and all of a sudden he finds himself with a great, one-on-one goal that just, is similar-esque to what we saw with Sonny against Burnley and that Puskas winning goal. I could see Mohamed Kudus doing something similar. I could also see it where there's a game where I mentioned before, it's 0-0. We're creating nothing. The game is really dull and boring. He just sort of says, F this, and takes it past 2-3 players and then just curls one into the top netting. I really rate Kudus. I think he's going to pretty much be a one-man attack for us this season until if potentially we get guys like Eze in the side. I think Kudus, with the ability that he has shown us, will score some some very, very impressive goals. And if anything, during his time at West Ham, he didn't score a ton of goals there, but a lot of the goals that he did score were very, very impressive, high quality goals. So I see him doing that for Spurs, to be honest.
For me, I think it's simple. It comes down to the two players with the ability in the squad. One, who's a maverick, which is Kudus, or two, someone that's, technically excellent at striking a ball and capable of a long ranger. And that's only Pedro Porro. So for me, it's between one of the two. But I'm going to go with the long ranger on this one. I think Kudus, to be honest with you, I fear he's going to end up this season incurring the wrath of a lot of Tottenham fans' frustrations going forward. You're going to see him get on the ball, take 3-4 players out, put balls on the plate for people who aren't going to be able to finish it, or he's not going to get a lot of help or a lot of players to work with. And I think ultimately a lot of people end up really frustrated at Kudus, but which they shouldn't, and I hope they don't. But for me, I just think it's going to come from a long ranger or a free kick, and that's got Porro written all over it. My guy, Pedro.
He's gone for Pedro in the past, Dave. He's very, very loyal to this guy. Let's hope he can produce him again. Moving on to best young player. We have all gone for Fatma Tassar. Now, the reason being is Dave and I don't think it will be Lucas Bergvall, mostly because I don't think he'll be given as many minutes this season as maybe he was under Ange Postecoglou, because at the minute, Fatma Tassar is one of the first names in the team sheet. Bentancur and Joao Palhinha would also be taking some minutes away from Lucas Bergvall. We have something to say a little bit later about Archie Gray. We don't know if he's necessarily lined up to be one of the best players this coming season. So for us, I mean, there's not many young players left. Fatma Tassar is a lot younger than people realize. He's only 22 years of age. And at the minute, now that we've gotten rid of all of our young players, apart from Matisse Tell and Odebear, I think Fatma Tassar is like the fourth youngest player in the team, or one of maybe the fifth youngest players. So I think we're going to cheat a little bit and consider him still a young player. He's still under 23 at the minute. So Dave, Fatma Tassar lined up for a big season.
Yeah, for me, look, Jack, I think he's one that we've really highly rated here on this channel, myself and yourself. I think ever since that breakout performance against AC Milan in the San Siro, I think, it was 50-50. So half of the fan base went with Ollie Skip. I mean, look how that worked out. He's at Leicester trying, begging to come back at Tottenham Hotspur. And then you've got Papa Matasar, who's still here. And, I've highlighted my reasons that night why I thought he was always going to progress above Ollie Skip, because he's got the passing range. He gets around the pitch. He's more mobile and he's better going forward with the ball. He's just a better player all around. And I think Papa Matasar is one over the last 2 seasons who is slowly getting better and better season in, season out. And I think one that maybe people are starting to take notice of. I think he gets a raw deal. I don't think he actually gets the credit that he deserves. I think what he does for this team is really underappreciated. Someone that gets around the pitch, turns ball over, or, all of a sudden people go, yeah, but what does he do on the ball? And then they look at someone like Bergvall and go, oh, well, he's young, he's got blonde hair, we've got to put him in. You know what I mean? Because he can pass a ball. But there's no point in having passers in the midfield if you don't have a player that can get around and turn it over. That's the biggest thing, and that's why we got ripped apart a lot last season when we left this guy out of the midfield. And I think that should be a big warning sign and show how good he is for this midfield. And you look at preseason, I think if Kulusevski didn't get an injury last season, he would have been player of the season come the end of the season, because he hit the ground running preseason, and that continued all the way up until he got injured. And I think it would be the same with Papa Matasar. I think this is his breakout campaign. I think Archie Gray is way off the levels. I think he could only dream of being a Papa Matasaurus Rex. I think Bergvall, I think he would go that I think he's probably 4th choice midfielder right now, to be honest with you, but I don't see him getting as much game time as he did last season, which only then for me leaves Papa Matasar Udabur. Udabur is one I think will develop this season, but I think Papa Matasar is going to have the breakout campaign. I think he's going to be a mainstay in this midfield.
Yeah, I can echo everything that you just said there, and he's just going to be the star boy this year for us. And I just, I see Ramman's comment, like, is he still considered young? People have called Brennan Johnson young, and Brennan Johnson's 2 whole
That's
years
24.
older than Pop Matasar. So I'd like to say that with Pop Matasar technically being, in terms of the guys who play somewhat regularly, Archie Gray, Oda Bear, Lucas Bergvall, Matisse Tell, I think Pop Matasar, if my math is correct, I believe is the 5th youngest, after those guys. So I'd still like to say and consider him one of the younger players. This team, now that we've gotten rid of Mikey Moore and a lot of the ones, Vuskovic, looks like he could be headed out the door. Dave and I were kind of thinking maybe it could be Vuskovic if he's actually kept around, but we're not too sure about his future. So it wasn't necessarily an easy pick, let's say, for young player of the season. Most improved. This one is kind of hard for me because I had 2 players here. I've gone for Kevin Danzo, mostly because I think he's already shown immense improvement. Even when Postecoglou was around, he was showing a lot of improvement. But I think under Frank, I think he's more of a manager that does kind of suit him because he is a no-nonsense center back. We know how much Thomas Frank got really good use out of no-nonsense center backs like Ben Mee. We're seeing him doing the long throws as well. I think he's shown that he can fill in for both Van de Ven as well as Romero. I just think Kevin Danzo will look like an absolute steal for the amount of money that we spent. I think it was something close to around 30 million. And so I think that's the reason why I'll put him down for most improved, just because I could see him settling in a bit more in the Premier League, settling a bit more under Thomas Frank. Maybe this style of play of defensive approach might suit him a bit more as well. I see him having a good year under us. The only other player I can maybe think about too was potentially someone like a Vicario. If Vicario improves on his ability to get it launched, handle set pieces, claiming crosses, that's someone that I also could see potentially being most improved. But that's not totally sure. Maybe he might not actually improve in those areas. So I went with Danzo.
No, look, I think Danzo, he's definitely the 3rd best centre back at the club, and argued I think he poses a massive threat to breaking up that partnership. But look, when it comes to my pick, the reason why I've gone with Jed Spence is I think last season I think he showed people what he's capable of, but I still think he's viewed by many as a backup option to Porro and Destiny Udogie at fullbacks. I think this season is going to be his breakout campaign, and I think by the end of the season, he'll be our best fullback and our regular fullback. I think he'll be 1st choice fullback. I think defensively, he's better than Destiny Udogie, and he's much better than Pedro Porro. To be fair, I think I've seen the only winger, and even this winger, he's pocketed twice, once before and once after, was Mo Salah. That got a bit of joy out of him. He's the only one. Everyone else, Jed Spence has shut down. And for me, I think he's good on the ball. And I think ultimately he'll end up displacing Destiny Adogi out of the team this season. And I think, he'll go on to probably be in the England squad by the end of the season. So I think he'll become the most improved player.
He better get into the England team. I think he's deserved it in the past. Flop of the season. And now Dave is going for Archie Gray. Shawnee Maddox has joined the comments, so now he can listen to you here, Dave, because he's saying you absolutely hate the guy. Tell us, Dave. Archie Gray. I mean, I share this opinion with you. I think Archie Gray has been given opportunities in the midfield. People say he hasn't, but he has. Towards the end of last season, Orange Postecoglou, he had a few opportunities there. Felt like he didn't really offer a whole lot. In that PSG game, he only was on for like 15, 20 minutes. In my opinion, was not doing very much to sort of help us out defensively. I just really question what Archie Gray is actually good at in the midfield.
Mm. Well, look, that's why I put him down as flop of the season. To be honest, I should have cheated and went with Brennan Johnson as well. I think he's going to go from hero to zero, from Europa League winner to flop of the season award winner, to be quite frank with you. But look, Shawnee says here, Dave is anti-Gray. Look, I'm not anti-Gray. Make no mistake about it. In fact, I actually praised him for his defensive performances across the back line last season. And I've said I thought it was incredible for an 18-year-old kid first year in the Premier League to step in and play centre back better than actual centre backs we've bought like Radu Dragusin and players like that. I've given him immense praise. However, looking at him in the midfield, I think many people are expecting this guy to kick on this season. I actually think he's fallen further and further down the pecking order in terms of options in the midfield. Look, when we first signed this guy, I got abuse on Twitter for about 2 weeks running. I was surprised with the fan base that he came with. I got abuse on Twitter for 2 weeks running because I wasn't happy with the money, with the amount of money that we spent for the player that we're getting. And I got absolutely ridiculed for it. To be fair, he hasn't kicked on. He hasn't shown he's worth anywhere near 40 million, to be honest with you. He just hasn't. In terms of the midfield options, Bergval's shown a lot more than him. And Bergval's had a bigger stride and step up to make last season than what Archie Gray did.
Yeah,
Archie Gray already had seasons in his leg from the Championship, which is a very sort of rigorous campaign, whereas Bergvall came from the Swedish second division at a much bigger jump and acclimatized to it a lot quicker. Papa Matasar is kicking on. We've brought in Paulinia for that defensive midfielder, which is what we signed Archie Gray to come in and do in the first place, which maybe shows they're not fancying him. Bentancur looks unbelievable right now. Then you've got Madison Kulusevski coming back. Where's the game time going to be for this kid? Ultimately, I think maybe in January, if we act in the market, he could be one that could end up being loaned out. If we don't incur as many injuries as we did last season, which many fans' logic is we're not going to, because Postecoglou was to blame for the injuries and he's not here, which means there's going to be a lot of limited game time for Archie Gray, which I think ultimately will end up him being sent out on loan. And I don't want to be mean by saying this, but ultimately I think too many people got hyped because he's English. I think if this guy, had a different flag beside his name, I think many people would actually fairly judge this guy and go, what does he offer in the midfield compared to all the other options we've got? I think because he's English, he gets overhyped. And of course, that's why we end up being suckered to pay 40 million for the guy. But people go, well, but you've got to give him minutes. Okay, but minutes are earned on the training ground. And no manager since we've signed him have thought he deserves to be rewarded for what they've seen on the training ground by putting him into the midfield. So for me, I think with the huge reputation that he's come with, I think, and what people expected him to do when he came here and how they expected him to kick on and develop, I would argue I don't see it. And I think he's further and further away from the team. And I think ultimately he'll be a guy come the end of the season with very little minutes under his belt. People can say it's harsh, but at the end of the day, all them people that told me I don't know football when I had my opinion first time around, what are you saying now to me 14 months later?
I had this debate with I share a lot of what you just said there, but I also had this debate with Rain Man, about Archie Gray, because I just feel like if you've spent 40 million pounds on someone, even if they're especially young, I don't think you can wait 3, 4, 5 seasons completely patiently and just be like, oh no, he'll eventually come good. He'll eventually come good. I think you can only say that about someone that maybe came in for around like 10, 15 million, like what we basically paid for like Kota Takai, Lucas Bergvall, Youngmin Hook, these ones that we spent very little money on. And then we're just hoping that eventually they'll come good. Spending 40 million pounds on Archie Gray, you would think by maybe 2 or 3 seasons in, he starts to establish himself in the midfield and starts to become a regular. I don't think he's anywhere close to that. If anything, he started to go a bit backwards with some of the opportunities he's been given. And where I would disagree with Bird here, saying let Gray have the time in our squad that Sarr has been afforded, he's
People want to
earned
sell
it. Sarr has taken opportunities. Like, look at his time under
Yeah.
Antonio Conte. He was thrown into a midfield against AC Milan in the Champions League alongside Oliver Skip. He debatably had an even better game than Oliver Skip did in that game away at the San Siro. He took that opportunity. That was one of the only times he was given any minutes in the midfield, and let alone not a 3-man midfield, a 2-man midfield where you have to be very disciplined. And Sarr played an absolute worldie. Ange Postecoglou's first season, Pop Matasar was being labeled as one of the most consistent players in the entire squad, one of the almost reliable players of the whole squad that year. He was very consistent. This last season, granted, was not one of his best years, yet he still, again, finished with 7, 8 more goal contributions than even Lucas Bergvall did. And now going into this season, he's an absolute number one man in that midfield team sheet at the minute. So I just feel like to say that Archie Gray, needs to be given as much time as Sarr has. Sarr also came for like 12, 15 million fee or something like that. We barely spent any money really on the kid when we bought him as well from Ligue 1. So I would say that Archie Gray is almost also a victim of the fee. The fee you have to think about, 40 million pounds. You would think he needs to start dominating, some games, and he has never done that in the midfield yet. So I don't believe that narrative that Sarr has somehow been wasting season after season. I think he's had some very good seasons since coming to the club, to be perfectly honest. But maybe what Sarr benefited from was actually having an extra season out on loan, whereas Archie Gray was kind of just thrown in straight away and then had to hit the ground running. So I don't know. That's just my feeling on it. I think that's to be honest, I just completely
Like
disagree. Sarr has had amazing games in the Spurs shirt, amazing games in a Spurs shirt against high level opponents. Archie Gray is just not.
It's just when I have watched him in midfield, right? He was brought in as this, no nonsense sort of CDM. I don't see him great at getting in, making these tackles that other midfielders are making. I don't see him being absolutely exceptional on the ball either. I just don't think he's got the footwork or the intensity in his game to actually just make it at this level right now. I think he is one that does need a loan move. Look, I'm not writing him off by any means. There, of course, between the age he is now and 22, of course, a player can make great strides over, a short period of time and really kick on. But I don't see it there in Archie Gray right now.
Yeah. Find out that I've gone for Johnson. I've given my reasons earlier. Just, I don't think he fits what Thomas Frank requires in terms of intensity, working hard off of the ball. And I don't think that you can build a whole team around a guy that's only good at one thing. And so I do feel like he's going to go from top scorer to, like Dave said, maybe from hero to zero. And then Matisse Tell, weirdly, kind of similar reasons, with what I've seen before with the guy. He can't finish. So that's a big issue, is that even in preseason, he had that one-on-one against Newcastle, which was one of the worst one-on-one misses I've seen in some time, to be honest, in a Spurs shirt. And when you look at his season under Ange, that half season, he had opportunities here and there where he should have been able to put them away, and he just didn't. He missed a lot of decent chances. And then I would also add, working hard off of the ball, again, is a big highlight and a big key factor for Thomas Frank. Matisse Tell in that PSG game, that was my bigger issue with him. It wasn't as much about missing the penalty, wasn't as much about other things. It really was actually the fact that that guy only had about 10, 15 minutes just to run his lungs out. He just sort of shuffles from side to side, doesn't put any real pressure on the ball. And I think PSG realized that, and really we're actually starting to carve us open because of that. Especially nowadays, it is about pressing from the front, being two hardworking players up top to sort of give guys trouble on the ball, not make passing very easy, especially when you're trying to break a team down. Matisse Tell was way too easy to play around and didn't show that desire, that hunger, and that intensity off of the ball. And I just wonder if he's going to end up being a bit of a flop for after spending 30 plus million, on the guy, and wonder if he'll start to maybe not get as many minutes as maybe some of us are hoping. Because some people are saying, oh, it's going to be a big, big season for Matisse Tell. I kind of think the opposite. I think he might be a guy that will only get so many minutes here and there, because especially with that work rate. And he doesn't finish. So that's my other thing.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Well, we're wrapping things up here and believe this is the very last one. Player of the season. Dave, you've gone for Bentancur. I think people could probably imagine what I've gone with Kudus for. I think Kudus is going to be a one-man attack for us this season, and probably will be our focal point of creativity, especially if someone like Eze doesn't come through the door. But why have you gone for Bentancur?
Yeah, the reason why I've gone for Bentancur, Jack, is look, he's missed massive chunks of the last couple of seasons. But I think people really forget how good this guy is because of the last two campaigns have been heavily disrupted. But if you go back to the form he was in under Conte, he was probably our best player at the club there for a period of time. And I look at him come back this preseason. It looks like he's come back with a point to prove. I think there's a new contract on the horizon for him as well. That should be signed before deadline day as well. But I just think he's so influential in that midfield. I think right now, when you look at it with the likes of Madison being out and stuff like that, I think when you look at Paulini and Sarr, they're sort of very similar to a certain degree in terms of they are more defensive-minded players. Now, of course, Sarr can get forward and he can score goals and that. But when I look at Bentancur, he's our most elegant player. You know, that guy gets the ball with players pressing him. He'll just do one step over. If they come to the left, he'll touch it to the right. And he reminds me of Luka Modric. As soon as the ball comes in, you have a player up his ass, and within 2 seconds, he's got 10 yards of space to be able to pick his passes. He's going to be so instrumental in this midfield. He is the deep line playmaker. He's going to get that ball off the back line and transition it into the forwards. You know, against low blocks that we come up with this season, aka Burnley tomorrow, he's going to be the guy that dictates the tempo of the game, the pace that we play at, and stuff like that. And I think he's going to remind many people how good he actually is, how influential he actually is. And for me, although I think Kudus is going to be phenomenal to watch, really exciting, I think what's going to let Kudus down is actually the pieces of the puzzle he has to work with. I think what's going to elevate Bentancur, again, is the pieces of the puzzle he's got to work with. He's got Paulini who complements him. He's got Sarr who complements him. Kudus doesn't have anyone who fucking compliments him. So I think largely, I just think somewhere along the season, people are just going to go, all he does is give away the ball. It's like, no, he gets into great promising positions, but if other players aren't there for a pass, or what do you want them to do? Like, you know, there's only so much the guy could do. So that's why ultimately I think Bentancur will get better recognition come the end of the season.
I've just gone for Kudus because, like I said, he'll be a maverick. He'll be a one-man attack for us, and I expect him to score some incredible goals and just be the source of creativity for us. I think pretty much halfway through the season, we'll just start consistently saying, need Kudus to have a good game if we stand any sort of chance of being able to beat this team. Need Kudus to be the source of creativity if we're going to be able to break this team down. Need Kudus to pull something out of the bag in order for us to win this game. I think we'll start to rely on him a lot. And that's my reason for why he'll be the player of the season. I think he will step up for us on a lot of these occasions, just with being the best player in that forward line by a considerable distance. And again, especially if we don't end up bringing through someone like an Eze, I think we'll be relying so much on someone like Kudus that he almost has to be then one of the players of the season. But that's my reasoning, because I already showed a lot of guy praise before that.
I think many people will side with you on this pick for sure. I just think
I love Bentancur. I'm glad that you did it.
What's going to happen is going to be a Son situation with Kudus. You know, everyone goes mad at Son, you know, because you're looking at him every week to be the difference maker, to be the guy. But you can't just rely on one player to do it on its own. You know, when Son had Kane, that's where you've seen the best of Son. Since Kane left, you've seen Son sort of season on season get worse and worse and worse. And that's because the talent we've brought to supplement him is worse and worse and worse. And I think Kudus is going to suffer a similar fate. Of course, it's not going to go to levels where people say we could sell him because we've only brought him this season. But mark my words, because of how shit we are going forward, how pony we are going forward, he will incur the wrath of a lot of it this season when others should be.
Exactly. Any final words, Dave? And thank you guys so much for being in here with us with the chat. I know plenty of people are going to disagree and or agree with our suggestions and our picks here. You know, why we put our necks out on the line and air it out here for you guys. And I think we've done it in a nice, convenient hour. So thank you guys so much for being here with us. Get ready for tomorrow, the start of the season and the start of these predictions will start to unfold here. So, but yeah, Dave, unless I'm missing anything.
No, look, guys, you know, make sure if you want to, when we're reviewing these at the end of the season, if you want to be a part of it, get all of your predictions in the comment section below. Smash the like button. And guys, big day tomorrow. First game of the Premier League campaign. Your predicted lineup is back. Your pre-match build-up will be happening. Great panels. So make sure you tune in for that. And then, of course, the watch-along. And then, of course, we'll have our post-match reaction, followed by Twitter Reacts out Sunday. So plenty of content to keep your eyes on here at the Irish Hotspur this weekend. My dad looks like he is, you know, on the full road to recovery, which means we are so back as well, just in time. So as always, guys, come on, you fucking Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs. See you all tomorrow, everybody. Have a good rest of your Friday, and we'll see you all later this weekend. Premier League is back.